thank you for joining, and we can move on to Nitesh, who will say a few words about Absinthe. So, Nitesh, you can join. Yeah, he's here. All right, so the stage is yours.
Thanks, Emin. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Absinthe Meetup. We are delighted to have you all here today. Thank you for all taking the time and joining the meetup, especially to the Indian friends who are here till this time to support me. Thank you so much. My name is Nitesh Mishra. I am thrilled to be here at Absinthe Meetup as a speaker. And also, I want to thank you, Mike, for asking me to talk about Absinthe, which are going to have into two parts. Today, we'll talk few things in a part one, and few of the things will be covered into the part two. As you already know, it's like a vast topic. And yep, let's start then. Let me share my screen. Okay, it's a code. Hope it is visible to all. Nice. Okay, then let's start with the GraphQL. And let's go to this. So our agenda of this discussion, this meetup today is that we'll talk about GraphQL, a bit of that, what's the introduction, query mutations, and then we'll switch to the Absinthe, which is a GraphQL toolkit for Elixir, where we'll talk about introduction of Absinthe and how we can integrate into the Elixir project, query and mutations using Absinthe. And just to let you know, subscription is also a part of GraphQL and Absinthe as well, which will be covered on the next meetup. Yep, it's GraphQL. So GraphQL is a query language for API that allows declarative data fetching. A client can ask for exactly what they want, and only that data is returned from the server. And what it is, it provides single endpoint to perform different operations. So instead of having a multiple endpoints like a REST API, a GraphQL API usually provides a single endpoint that can perform a different operations based on request body. GraphQL is a new API standard that provides more efficient, powerful, and flexible alternative to REST. At its core, GraphQL enables declarative data fetching, where a client can specify exactly what data it needs from an API. Instead of multiple endpoints that returns flexible data structure, a GraphQL server only exposes a single endpoint and respond very precisely the data client asked for. Most applications today have a need to fetch a data from a server where the data is stored in a database. It's the responsibility of API to provide an interface to store the data that fits an application needs. A more efficient alternative to REST. That's the third point in a slide, if you can see. So what's the mean? REST has been a popular way to expose data from server. When the concept of REST was developed, client applications were relatively simple and development pace wasn't nearly where it is today. REST thus was a good fit for many applications. However, API landscape has radically changed over the last couple of years. So there are multiple factors which says it's more efficient to REST, especially increased mobile uses, low power devices and sloppy networks were initial reason why Facebook developed this GraphQL. And GraphQL minimizes the amount of data that needs to be transferred over the network and thus measurably improve application operating under the conditions. Second thing, variety of different front-end framework and platform. Also fast development and expectation of rapid feature development. So continuous development has become a standard for many companies. Rapid iteration, frequent product update are indispensable. With REST API, the way data is exposed by the server often needs to be modified to account for a specific requirement. Design changes on the client side, this hinder fast development practice and product iterations. Fourth is schema definition language. What's the mean of schema definition language? GraphQL has its own type system that used to define the schema of API. Syntax for writing a schema is called SDL, which is a schema definition language. Let's say we have a defined type, which is given by Absinthe or GraphQL, which is a int, string, etc. However, there can be possibility that we might need a new type inside a type. For an example, if you can see my screen, let's check. We have a, let's consider the example of a blog post made by some person or author. And here we have a post which requires a two field, title and author. In case of title, we can use string, but in case of author, we might need a more different type of a struct. So we can define our own struct, which is a person, which consists name and age. So when we are like this, liberty is given by GraphQL, which is called SDL. Next, GraphQL is not only for React developers. What is the meaning? The first time, actually, when Facebook publicly spoke about GraphQL in year 2015 in React conference somewhere, and shortly after that, they made it open source. Because Facebook always used to speak about GraphQL in context of React, so most of the people started having this perception that it's not for non-React people, which is not correct anyway. Interestingly, GraphQL has most been picked up to be used in the context of web technology and has gained only little traction in native mobile spaces. Another thing, rapidly growing community. In fact, GraphQL is a technology that can be used anywhere, a client communication with an API. Companies like Coursera, GitHub, Elp, Twitter, these are the big companies that they are using a GraphQL currently. Initially, it was having a perception, just to add the history, like Netflix and Coursera, they both were working on a similar kind of a feature. But once the Meta made it open source, Coursera dropped the idea completely and adopted GraphQL. However, Netflix is having their own similar type of a tool which called Falker. Okay, let's move to the next. The core concept of a GraphQL: schema, query, mutation, subscription, and few more, but these are the major part. In a GraphQL, everything is strongly typed and schema contains information about API's capability. Query, which is mostly been used for read operation, is a type that serves an entry point to all read operations on the API. Mutation, a mutation type that exposes an API to mutate data on the server, which is mostly been used on write, update, delete operations. A subscription in a GraphQL are a way to have an event in a server, push data out to client in a real time. Unfortunately, we are not going to talk about subscription today, but obviously in our next meetup, we'll cover it out. Let's start one by one. What is the GraphQL schema? Yep. Schema forms a core of a GraphQL API. So in a GraphQL, everything is strongly typed and contains information about API capabilities. So if you see the screen, here is an example. So what's the meaning of this example? There is a bit description here that specify a post will have an ID, title, and author, all non-null. because of this exclamation. So if you are using exclamation on the data type at the end, which making it's non-null. And if you are not using this exclamation, which you can make it nullable. This is what it is. Let's move to the next segment, which is query, GraphQL query. So the GraphQL query, a type that serves an entry point for all read operations to the API. Client can read this schema to know exactly what an API provide, and the server handle the rest and return the expected result. For example, if you see, what we are doing is we are using this keyword macros query. We are having an object, a post, we are passing ID, and then we are expecting ID, title, author, and inside the author, we are expecting these things. I'll definitely show some practical example once these things will be done, but this is what it is. Here, we are passing ID and we are expecting result from server using this GraphQL, and at right side, you can see the result. This is one way to pass the variable, and you can also pass this query value, the variable using inside a query variable. Okay, there are two ways to pass that. Now, similarly, mutation, which is the type that exposes the API to mutate data on server, mainly used in creating a new data, updating and deleting the existing data. What we are doing here is we are using this mutation to create the post where we are passing the ID, and based out of ID, what we are passing is we are passing this title. So earlier, if you can see, the title was an introduction to Absinthe. The title became something new, which is a demo on Absinthe, and we are getting this author detail. And yep, so this was the part of the GraphQL that I wanted to share. So the thing is, the client can read the schema to know exactly what an API provides. To perform a query or mutation on the API, you send a document describing the operation to be performed. The server handle the rest and return the result. This allows for more efficient data exchange compared to the REST API. It's especially useful for rarely used complex field in the result that takes time to compute, which is a majorly GraphQL come into the picture. Now, let's turn into Absinthe and start building our API into our Elixir application. Hope you guys are still having some energy to tolerate me. Let's talk a bit of Absinthe. In Absinthe, it's a GraphQL toolkit for Elixir. And as you know that anything in Elixir, if you want to integrate, you have to use it as a library using dependency, which will come to the next one. So we have a majorly two-part, defining a schema and then executing the documents. So defining schema is like define the structure of data entity, define custom scalar type, define resolution function to access data using flexible and extensible middleware plugin system. When we are saying executing document means can be any standard GraphQL query, mutation or subscription. May include reusable variable definitions as a context that you can integrate with authentication and authorization strategy. Can include multi-part file uploaded as a GraphQL argument. Okay, let's move to the next one. Setting up your Elixir app with GraphQL and Absinthe. So the very first step is you have to add Absinthe plug and JSON into your mix file. So this is the way to start. You have to add these things, and then you have to add an entry into a router to forward requests to specific path. Let's say in case of API, we are forwarding all requests coming to API using this Absinthe plug, and this is redirecting to the schema learn Absinthe web.schema. Okay. Also keep in mind that installation steps may vary for different applications based on the requirement, which may see later in this point itself. Now, define the Absinthe type. Okay. As you already have added the dependency, forwarded the route, added this entry pointer to the router, and then you need to go to this type, define the Absinthe type. Notice that we have passed learn Absinthe web schema as a schema to Absinthe plug into router. As I said, this is an entry point to our GraphQL. To build it, we will use Absinthe schema behavior, which provides macro for writing the schema. Okay. In Absinthe, object refers to any type that has subfields. In the above query, you can see this type as a post here. Yeah, this type as a post here. A first argument to the object macros is identifier of a type. This must be unique across the whole schema. Each object can have many fields. Each field can use the fulfill the power of field macros. These are the fields. These are the macro. You have to use it. That we saved above when defining a query. So we can define a field in a nested way itself. Now, as we have a type, we also have a scalar type. Scalar type is a custom type, basically, which we want to define. So instead of using an object, you can also get scalar types, which is a special type with no subfields and serialized to native value in the result. So this is an example of scalar type, which is Elixir datetime. To support datetime, we'll use the schema and we'll use the scalar macro. This tells Absinthe how to serialize and parse the datetime. Also, once you have defined the scalar type, in our case, we have defined this scalar type, ISO z_datetime. You can utilize it anywhere that you want to. Absinthe already provides several built-in scalar, which is Boolean, float, ID, integers, string, etc. And also provide some custom scalar, which is a datetime, naive datetime, decimals, etc. And we also have a type modifier. Type modifier is basically a type to mark some additional constraint or properties. For example, you can use not null to show the value cannot be null, and also list of to say the particular key you need a value in a list. Let's move to the query, how we are having a query. In Absinthe, this is a way to write a query. So let's try to understand what is that and what we are doing inside a query. We first define a query block inside a schema. This defines a special query type that we actually discussed in GraphQL sections. The query type has only one field, which is post, if you can see. And the second argument is to a macro. This field is also having argument as an ID, which is a not null. And when we are saying not null, as I said, it's a type modifier, and this is an Absinthe way of saying some exclamation that we have seen in the GraphQL. It cannot be a null. And then the final thing is resolve. The resolve macro define how the field is resolved, and it's accept 2 or 3 arity functions. So when it's a 2 arity function, it receives argument map and Absinthe resolution struct. And when it's a 3 arity functions, it accepts above 2, which we accept in a 2 arity, which is argument map and the resolution, but the first parameter will be parent entity. This function always returns OK comma value or error comma reason. This is all about Absinthe query. Now we have a mutation. And in a mutation, you will see something new, which instead of object, we are also using input object. The input object macros to define an input object for post create input, which has a 3 fields: title, description, author ID. We'll see the practical example soon. For note that definitions of a field changes slightly from what we could use in the output type. For example, for the field inside the input object, we can add a value which we are providing, or we can also add a default value. In case we are not getting a value, we can add some default value by passing comma default value and whatever you want to pass. Let's say in case of description, as it's a nullable and user is not providing a specific value, we can use the default value as well. Again, if we see, most of the things are the same as we are using in a query, and the resolve is being used in a similar fashion when in the way you are using in the query. That accepts 2 types of arity, which having 2 functions and 3 parameterized, something like that. And when we are talking about resolve and we are calling the resolver, let's move to resolver. Yep, this is a resolver we have. In a resolver, we use the post attribute to create a post. If that is successful, we respond with the post object. The result map should correspond the mutations result type. In our case, it's a post. Like here we have defined field as a create post, and we are expecting type as a post. For input, we are providing post create input. Now, when we execute this mutation from the last slide, it will call the create post function, and based out of the value, either will receive OK comma value, or if it is a error, will receive an error. Okay, and now as since 10-15 minutes, I am just showing a slide and making you bored. So let's check some code. Yep. Yeah, here it is. Coming to this, what we are doing is, most of the things I already have set up so that I can save the time and I can showcase little fast. So this is the dependencies. These are the things that we are utilizing. We are adding Absinthe, Absinthe plug, JSON, and then in a router, okay, you might be expecting this forward API, and then call the plug, and then it should render to this schema. Instead of that, I'm using this GraphQL as Absinthe provide a GraphQL tool, the plug, not tool. So in case of development, we generally use GraphQL, and using this, we usually get a beautiful UI to do the testings and all. This thing refers us to a schema. Let's go to schema. Oh, there is something new. We were talking about object, input object, fields, and now we have import type and import fields. Let's have a little discussion on that. So what is this? In general, if you are developing a very small project, it's okay to keep everything into the schema. As you have seen in my slides, query types, scalar type, and mutations all have a same module schema name. But just to showcase, I was just showing one of the part. But if you will collaborate all, it will become a huge module. To overcome it, we have a different way to utilize it. You can structure it similar fashion. The you actually structure the post page. So for example, let's say as your schema starts growing, you will soon notice putting all type of definitions and the query field in a same file is not sensible. This is where import type and import field come into play. So basically we are importing a type, query, and mutation. This query consists all the struct types. If you see, we have a post, which consists ID, title, description, author, comments. Author is having author type, which is again, we are defining the author type. And then we have a post queries. Similarly, in a mutation, if you can see, we have a input object, which post create input. And okay, I also have update function. So I have added the post update input. And then we have a post mutation, which is responsible to create post and update post. And at end, we have a resolver, which is responsible to create post, update post, get post, and list post. And also we have some functions, which is handling the data and all the requests, all this business logic, which is not a part of this meetup. So it's not much important to share. And just to let you know, I am keeping all the thing into the state instead of having into the database. So let's go to some example and let's start checking through GraphQL UI. Into presentation, I guess it was here. Yep, here it is. Okay, in a comment box, you can suggest some good title. I'll add the title to create the post. Some post. Here we are passing the author ID, which is required for this part of presentation because we are not dealing with authorization and authentication part. But at later point, at the meetup 2, when we will start talking about all the rest of the thing, this author ID will be taken care directly as a user logged in through the token. So this time we are passing the author ID. Let's say some post for this meetup. And at the title, some title is like some description. Description for this meetup maybe. And I'm expecting ID, title, author, comments, descriptions, all the thing, which we can remove and we can expect only one thing, which is ID, and let's create it. Wow, we got this post created with the ID as a 7. Let's fetch the post. To fetch the post, we have get post when we are passing 7, expecting ID, title, author, and comments. We got that. So we have some post meetup, and let's say we can also fetch description maybe, and we have a description. Here we see we don't have a comments. So let's say we can update the comment for ID 7. Let's remove all this thing, adding some comment to update my post, and let's call it, and then we can fetch it again. So here it is. We have some comments, and similarly, if you want to update more, you can fetch it. You can go with that. to showcase, I have used a lot of other way to fetch the post. One is that get post. When I was doing this get post by passing ID directly, but you can also pass in a query variable, as we have a 7 which we recently created, and we can fetch like that. So this is the way to fetch data. That's another API that I have created for this to get all the posts. You can fetch and you can check all the existing posts. Similarly, you can create it, you can update it. This is the way to integrate Absinthe into your Elixir application. Yep, that's it. And now we can talk about what is the next that we can talk of in Meetup 2, which is authentication and authorization, plug and middleware, file upload, talk about subscription and the testing. So these are the things. And also we can talk some core concept, data loader and data upload actually. And another thing which is core concept of testing of Absinthe, I'll be showcasing you on the next meetup. So yeah, that's it from my end. If you guys have a question, please shoot into the chat box and we'll be happy to answer. Hope you have learned something today new.
Thank you, Nitesh. Great introduction to GraphQL as well as Absinthe. Okay, so if you have any questions, just paste it in the chat. I'll open the Q&A in a moment. Okay.
Useful stuff. Thanks, Marcelo. Is it much harder to implement in just JS? No. Actually, as I was mentioning, if you go to the history of the GraphQL, it was actually meant with the JS itself. Later point of time, people started utilizing into all the languages, and wherever you can use the API, REST API, GraphQL is like a best suitable, based out of your requirement. Not harder to implement. It can be implemented very easily.
One question from my side. In the meantime, do you usually go for GraphQL right now if you need to implement the API, or do you feel like it's well suited for some specific use cases? And there are some cases where you wouldn't choose GraphQL.
Yeah. The next question is again from Marcelo, that GraphQL console is provided automatically by Absinthe. Yes, it is. And if you can see the code in a GraphQL, in a router, I have used the plug called GraphIQL. So all the requests coming to GraphIQL, it will render to this beautiful UI, and which will make your job much easier. What documentation is generated for API from the source code once it's annotated? Simon, you want to answer it?
I think that, so at least this is my understanding. When it comes to documentation of what's being generated in GraphQL, which Nitesh showed to you, the playground, if I understand it right, this is automatically generated because you're using a specific functions, actually macros in Absinthe to generate those. So the types, mutations, etc. In order to build the proper structure and methods used in GraphQL, you have to use those, and it automatically generates the things that you've been able to see in the playground. So at least from my perspective, this is a huge
Yep.
win in case of GraphQL.
This is the way. And if you can write a proper documentation for all this type, it's an easy way to get here. And obviously, it will generate automatically by Absinthe itself. That's the next question. Is there a way to automate the creation Absinthe schema from GraphQL STL? Automate creation Absinthe schema. Absinthe schema is by default, it's coming with the library. And if you are being specific about the schema that we utilize into our code, then we have to write it. Is that what you are looking, Cuba? Thank you.
Okay, I think we don't have more questions so far. So my question before was whether you typically choose right now GraphQL and Absinthe for your projects instead of doing a typical REST API implementation. Do you feel like this is like the default, let's say, default solution for you to implement API at the moment?
In a project that I'm working?
Yeah, on the projects you're working.
The one I shown it to you, or the one I'm working in a company?
Yeah, the one that you work on in the company.
Yep, that's a nice question. Generally, when we have some mobility into that project and too much mobile things are involved, then I'll definitely recommend to use the GraphQL. The reason to use it is it's far better than REST. And when I say far better than REST, then especially when there is a sloppy network, which were the initial reason why Facebook developed this GraphQL, and minimizes the amount of data that needs to be transferred over the network. So that's one of a reason. And in our project, it's the best suited because we are using at 3 different places. Obviously, 2 for the mobile, Android and iOS, and 1 for this UI. At the 3 different places we are utilizing, and as this application is more of like the one project I'm associated is more of education, where we also have some similar kind of a concept of social media where we educator can post some data related to the children, all the observations, and including the medias and all, and we have to do some heavy data loading. So in that scenario, our this GraphQL is definitely fulfilling and having some fast responsive result.
Okay.
Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I feel the same. I feel that there are a lot of, let's say, quick wins that you get with Absinthe and GraphQL because you don't have to worry about many stuff. Normally, you would have to implement it by yourself in REST API or choose another libraries to provide some kind of documentation or playground. So I definitely recommend it too if you play with API. So we have one last question here from Marcelo.
Okay, I can see that. Is there any relation between Absinthe and Ash? Would you use both? Okay, basically these two are 2 different things. Ash is a framework, which is a replacement of, or I can say advancement of Phoenix. Now Absinthe is the library for GraphQL. So if you want to utilize Absinthe inside Ash, that's totally possible.
There are also some modules inside of Ash that supports this. So some of the things that you would have to write by yourself in Absinthe, Ash, let's say, improves a bit. Okay, so maybe this is gonna be last question from Hector. So here it is.
Is there any chance to use Absinthe in Erlang? That's a nice question. Now, Absinthe is a toolkit to use a GraphQL especially for Elixir. And I'm not quite sure that we can directly use it, but as Elixir uses the same VM, so we definitely gonna need to do some tweaks to utilize Absinthe. Now, using a GraphQL inside Erlang is a possible.
Yeah, and I'll also add one thing that basically, since it also needs to integrate with router, Phoenix router, it's, from my perspective, it's, yeah, as you said, not possible to integrate it until you do some real tweaks to the library.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Nitesh, and for your willingness to do the second episode where you explore in more details the rest of the things. I believe it was a very insightful presentation. So I can also see in the chat that it was. So thank you very much. See you on the second episode then. Yeah, and have a good day. We'll also have a short, let's say, survey for everyone. So if you can, if attendants would like to help us improve the meetups, if you can just take 5 minutes after the presentation, I would really be grateful. Thank you.
And thank you so much to all. Thank you, Simon, for organizing. Thank you, Mike. I really enjoyed this, and I'll try to put up more information with different energy on the next part. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.